Hello and welcome into another episode of Locked On Wolves. Today on the show, it's the post-game podcast. The Wolves beat the Hawks by 21 on Monday night behind a triple-double from Kyle Anderson, a cool 32 from Anthony Edwards in his hometown of Atlanta. There's plenty to break down in this one. Really, most everybody played well, and there's some interesting rotation stuff that happened. Plenty to get into today here on the post-game pod. Welcome in. You are Locked On Wolves.
You are Locked On Timberwolves, your daily Minnesota Timberwolves podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Wolves podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. My name is Ben Beecken. I'm the host of Locked On Wolves. Today's episode is brought to you by our friends at Ibotta. Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items from produce to personal care to pantry goods. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 off just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKED when you register. Go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app. Happy Tuesday, everybody, and it's a victory Tuesday after the Wolves. Big win over the Atlanta Hawks on Monday night. We're going to break the whole thing down here on the post-game pod today. First off, though, a big thank you for making Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Locked On Wolves is free and available everywhere. That includes YouTube as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app. That's on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. More great local sports coverage 24/7 for free. Download the Locked On Sports Minnesota app today on Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and my account, which is at Beecken, and that's with two B's, two E's, C-K-E-N. All right, big Wolves win on Monday. The Atlanta Hawks had been playing a little bit better under Quinn Snyder, of course, making the coaching change here a couple weeks ago. And, a good win. The Wolves won by 21. It was nearly wire to wire. They only trailed by a single point early in this game. Wolves were up by 11 at the end of the first, up by 24 at halftime, end up winning by 21. No real moments of true panic. I think the Hawks got it down to 13 midway through the fourth quarter, but Kyle Anderson gets an and one. There's a bit of, just kind of calm suddenly from the Wolves, and the Hawks are the ones that you can kind of feel the air go out of their sails, the wind go out of their sails, I guess, the air go out of the building, mixing metaphors there. But that was like the only time it ever was really kind of sort of in doubt, and it never really felt that way. This was just a professional win. And perhaps not surprisingly, the best players on the floor for the Wolves, the best player on the floor was Kyle Anderson. And you could argue Rudy Gobert. I mean, the line, if you looked at all five starters, the one that pops out the least would be Rudy Gobert's of the five. But I would argue that the line is not indicative of how well he played. We'll get into that here in a minute. But I do want to start with Anthony Edwards. I think I'd like to do that. And then we'll get to Kyle Anderson. We'll get to Gobert. The rest of the starting lineup, everybody really played well in this game. And also the bench, man, there's a ton to talk about. But let's start with Ant because he did score 32. He's the headline grabber. He's in his hometown, the whole thing. 32 points, 12 of 25 shooting, just a shade under 50%. But he was only 2 of 10 on three-point attempts in this game. That means he was, 10 of 15 on two-point attempts. He got to the line 10 times, 10 free throw attempts for Anthony Edwards, making 6 of them. He also added 8 rebounds, 5 assists, a couple of blocks, and a steal, had 3 turnovers. My opinion on Ant's game, I've already seen, immediately after the game or during the game even, I was seeing Twitter, the highlight. There were 3 really nice dunks. No monster poster dunks, but 3 really bouncy, really springy two-handed slams for Ant in this game. And he had a couple of dagger threes. The one, I think it was over DeAndre Hunter, that the game was basically over, but it was just cold-blooded at the end of the game, leading to that last Hawks timeout. Those things are the moments on Twitter that everybody sees, and it's like, man, this is all-star Ant, right? And rightfully so. They're all wow moments. And then you've got this other side of things where it's like, he was, what was he in the first half? He was 0 of 6 or 0 of 7 outside the arc. He missed, I think, his first at least 7, if not 8 3-point attempts. Was missing at the free throw line. Had a couple of head-scratching turnovers. There's that side of it too. His halftime line, I had it here a minute ago. I lost it. It was not good. Shooting the ball was not good. But then you look at the line after the game, and other than that, if you don't see the 2 of 10 outside the arc, you'd be like, oh man, 32, 8 and 5, 12 of 25 from the floor. We'll take that. And it really was. I hate to just kind of it feels like I'm punting using this term, but it was a mixed bag for Anthony Edwards. It was neither of, or it was both of those things, right? There were amazing, outstanding, really, frankly, all NBA moments. And there were, oh, he's 21 and he's, at times can be, we get a little out ahead of our skis in terms of evaluating Anthony Edwards and what he is today versus what his ceiling is. Both were true in this game. There were some, and I talked about this with Marnie on the postcast, Marnie Gelder from Valley Sports North. We talked, if you're listening on audio, it's the last episode before this. We did this live about an hour after the game. And I opened the show, I opened the postcast by saying, hey, Ant played way better than he did Friday against Brooklyn. And Marnie was like, yeah, he did, but some of those shots that he was taking, they weren't perfect, right? The shot selection wasn't perfect. And she's 100% right. Going back and looking at that, there were some of those, like, they're not heat check threes. It's the opposite, right? It's like, I think Marnie said it was like he was trying to break the seal, right? Because he missed his first 6 or 7 outside the arc. So Ant's thinking, I'll shoot my way out of this, because that's the type of player he is. He has confidence. And Chris Finch doesn't want Anthony Edwards to stop shooting threes. But the Timberwolves want his shot selection to be smart at the same time. And, I agreed with what Marnie said, but then I kind of countered on the postcast and I was like, look, I think, both are true. Again, like, he got into the paint, he got to the line 10 times. He also launched 10 threes. Eventually they were going to go in. It's Anthony Edwards. He's a really good, he's a good 3-point shooter. He's a really good player in general. You don't want him to stop shooting. So it was like, there were a couple of moments where it's like, okay, you're getting to the paint. It was one of the best points in the paint games in Timberwolves franchise history. I mean, that's how prolific they were, how easy it was for Minnesota to get into the paint and score against this Hawks defense. Minnesota had 82 paint points in this game, which I believe the franchise record's 84, if I'm not mistaken. It was just like, why bother shooting threes if you can make so much hay in the paint? And that's why it was maybe a little bit frustrating at times, the shot selection. But in general, I thought his overall decision-making was good. He had a couple of really nice assists in this game. He had 5 assists to 3 turnovers. I thought that the decisions with the ball in his hands were mostly good. It was less of the head down, straight isolation that we saw against the Nets on Friday, because there was too much of that, frankly, last time out. And you look at this game, Ant had 5 assists. Mike Conley had 6 assists. Rudy Gobert had 4 assists. Kyle Anderson had 12 assists. We'll talk about him and his triple-double here next. Jordan McLaughlin had 5 off the bench. Like, the Wolves had 39 assists as a team to only 10 turnovers. This was a good passing game for Minnesota. They moved the ball. The offensive, the movement in general was there. The ball movement was there. There were cutters. There was, passing on the perimeter. Pick and roll game was smart. And it really feels like I'm oversimplifying it to say, like, hey, how much of this is just straight ball movement? Like, how important is that? But it opens everything up. It sounds so simple, but if the ball's moving, it's harder to double team Anthony Edwards if you're snapping the ball around the perimeter. And when the ball rotates back to Ant, or to anybody for that matter, if the ball's moving, whoever's receiving it, you're either going to get an open jumper, or you're going to have a half step to a full step on the defender. They're going to be out of position. They might be sliding back to get in front of you. You get the angle. You can cut them off and go to the rim. How many times have we seen teams do that to the Wolves by using really strong ball movement? The Wolves can do that to other teams, and they've now got the athletes to beat people off the dribble, whether it's Ant, Jaden McDaniels. I mean, I guess those would be the two. Like, Kyle Anderson's not like blowing past anybody, but those are the two primary guys that can do that, right? And ball movement leads to those moments. And set defenses, it's part of the reason Chris Finch wants to go fast, because set defenses now are trying to trap Anthony Edwards, and sometimes doing it successfully. If the Wolves can get down the court, whether it's in a fast break or a secondary break, before the defense is fully set, they could be so much more successful. And a lot of times out of that secondary break, it's swing the ball to the other side, right? It may not be on that first push. It may not be in that 3-on-3 or 3-on-2 down the court. Hopefully you're scoring on a 3-on-2, but maybe it's not, right? Maybe you reverse the ball and it's a trail 3, like when Karl-Anthony Towns comes back, right? Or you reverse the ball and maybe Ant was the first one down the court. You reverse it to the other side, and then Jaden McDaniels gets a pump fake dribble drive opportunity at the basket, or comes back around and you're only still 10 seconds into the shot clock, and it's Ant being the beneficiary of the ball movement. But ball movement is so vital to the success of any offense, but to what the Wolves are trying to do. And if you're in straight half court, that's when you get into the Rudy pick and roll, right? That's when you convert on the lobs to Rudy. And we'll talk more about that here in a minute. But for Ant to be successful consistently, and for Jaden McDaniels too to be successful, though I would say those two guys benefit the most from that rapid ball movement. Because if you're talking screen and roll, you're talking Conley and Anderson and Gobert are primarily the guys, and obviously Ant, but Ant's going to, that's when teams are doing what they can to force the ball out of his hands. So I was impressed with the ball movement generally in this game. I want to talk a little more about Rudy and Kyle Anderson both. Also, little Jaden McDaniels, some bench talk. We'll do individual studs and duds here at the end of the show, but there's still plenty to get to. So we'll do all that here next. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our new friends at Ibotta. We're always throwing money at something. Kids' school supplies, a new house project, the list goes on and on and on. It's time to stop spending your hard-earned money without getting anything in return. Enter Ibotta. You can earn cash back on every shopping trip. Ibotta gives you cash back on hundreds of grocery items, from produce to personal care to pantry goods. Either link your loyalty account or upload your receipt after you shop and get your cash back. It's that easy. The average Ibotta user earns $120 per year in real cash back. That could cover the cost of an entire shopping trip, or you could use your cash back to buy that flight you've been eyeing, the game you're dying to go to, or the fancy dinner that you've been craving. A typical basket of groceries was over $50 more expensive at the end of 2022 than the beginning of the year due to inflation. You could earn 2.5 times that in cash back from Ibotta, or even more depending on how much you use Ibotta. Ibotta gives you real cash back, not points. Other apps give you points that don't amount to much. With Ibotta, you get real cash back that you can cash out to your bank account, PayPal, or gift cards. You can earn cash back on hundreds of online brands and retailers too when you start with Ibotta. That includes Macy's, Lowe's, Sephora, Best Buy, and more. Right now, Ibotta is offering our listeners $5 just for trying Ibotta by using the code LOCKED when you register. Just go to the App Store or Google Play Store and download the free Ibotta app and use the code LOCKED. That's Ibotta, Ibotta, in the Google Play or App Store and use the code LOCKED. Okay, we've talked offensive flow. Let's talk about the vets. Let's talk Rudy Anderson, Rudy Gobert, and Kyle Anderson. Let's start with Kyle because I've probably gone too long in the show without recognizing the triple double. By the way, the fun stat that's floating around, I believe the way they had it on TV on Bally Sports North was Kyle Anderson is the first Timberwolves player to have multiple double doubles in a season since Ricky Rubio and Kevin Love in the 2013-14 season. I saw Timberwolves PR didn't mention Rubio, just mentioned Kevin Love. So I don't know. I can't confirm, but either way, 13-14, whether it was Rubio and or Love, impressive statistic for Kyle Anderson, to be sure. And also a little surprising. I guess Towns only has maybe 1 or 2 career triple doubles total, like not just, not 2 in a season. So anyway, Anderson, though, 14 points on just 6 shots in this game. He only attempted 6 shots, was 5 of 6 shooting, 1 of 2 outside the arc. His only miss was an air ball from the left corner. Made his other 5 shot attempts in this game, got to the line 3 times, had a big and one, by the way, when the game was down to, it was a 13-point game with roughly 6 minutes to play. And Anderson got fouled, hit the shot, hit the free throw, big play. That's the moment where it's kind of teetering, right? You need your vet to make a big play. Slow-mo does just that. He finishes with 14 points on those 6 shots, 12 assists to only 2 turnovers, 10 rebounds, 2 steals, and 2 blocks. So a pretty stat-stuffing performance for Anderson. Also a plus 33 if you're in an individual player, single game plus minus, which is a fickle quote-unquote statistic to say the least. But here I think it paints a good picture. A plus 33 in a strong defensive game from Kyle Anderson. Very, very switchable as always. And the Wolves defensive scheme, I don't want to spend a ton of time on this because the Wolves won, and Trae Young, well, he had a good scoring game, was kind of forced to just do what he could in the mid-range and get to the line, which is what he does generally anyway. He prefers to shoot more threes than he did in this game, but he's not a dynamic 3-point shooter necessarily. And yeah, Trae had his 41, but the Wolves' strategy was just like throw length at him, like make things difficult, try and force him, run him off the 3-point line, make him get in among the trees and try and score. The Wolves, actually, I was really impressed with the lack of foul trouble. Luka Garza did his thing and ended up with 5 fouls in 18 minutes. Nobody else had more than 4. And McDaniels ended up with 4 fouls in 26 minutes. So I guess he had a little bit of foul trouble there in the middle of the game. But the length of Kyle Anderson, the intelligence of Kyle Anderson, knowing where to be and when, was so prominent in this game on both ends of the floor, but especially defensively. Like the triple-double is what jumps off the page, obviously. But the triple-double has nothing to do with defense, other, I guess, defensive rebounding, which all 10 of his rebounds, by the way, were defensive in nature. But he was his consistent self on both ends of the floor, made the right decisions on offense, ran a little bit of offense, ran some fast break, a very well-rounded game. And this was a game where you need the I get a little tired of this phrase, but the quote unquote adults in the room to say, hey, look, it's a 1-game road trip. We had a bad overtime loss to Brooklyn Friday. Not a bad loss, but a really disappointing one, a game they really should have won. You can't punt this 1-game road trip to a mediocre Atlanta Hawks team that just went through a coaching change. You have to win. And yeah, it's frustrating that you'd be in 5th in the West if you'd won Friday and Monday, but you didn't. Now win Monday. And Kyle Anderson was a huge part of that. I think that clearly that was something that was talked about in the locker. I mean, actually, Joe Boylan, the Timberwolves assistant coach, said at halftime with Katie Storm on Bally Sports North, mentioned that Torian Prince said at halftime in the locker room something to the effect of, play the game, don't play the score. Like, don't think, hey, we're up 24. We're up 24, right? Just play the game. Play like you came out in the first quarter. The Wolves largely did that. They lost the second half by 3 points in total, but there was never this massive letdown. And Kyle Anderson, again, is that steadying hand that Timberwolves fans have grown accustomed to seeing. Rudy Gobert, I said this off the top of the show, 14-8. Like, that's not a sexy box score line, right? 14-8, 4 assists, 3 blocks. It's nice, 5 of 10 shooting, 4 or 5 at the free throw line. So he did shoot free throws much better than his performance the other night. But I liked his game. And Marty and I talked about this on the postcast as well. But Rudy was in the right place at the right time. He had really good feel in this game. Sometimes, the feel has been a bit off. The chemistry between the Wolves ball handlers and Rudy in terms of positioning, where they are on the floor. There were a couple early rough possessions. Kyle Anderson threw him a rough pass at the ankles, kind of reminiscent of what D'Angelo Russell used to do all the time with Rudy. But as the game went on, Rudy converted lob dunks. I need to go back and look, but I think by at least 3 different people threw him lobs in this game. Jordan McLaughlin threw him a nice one. There was somebody else that I can't remember who it was. It might have been Nikhil Alexander Walker that you wouldn't expect to just throw a really nice lob pass to him. Just a solid Rudy Gobert game, not a jump off the page Rudy Gobert game, but a professional one that in tandem with Kyle Anderson, who scored. They were the 2 low men of the 5 starting members of the starting lineup. Conley had 21, like talking about the adults in the room, quote unquote. 21-6 for Mike Conley, 9 of 13 shooting, 3 of 5 outside the arc. Jaden McDaniels had 19 points, 10 of which were in the first quarter when the Hawks tried to guard Jaden McDaniels with Trae Young, and the Wolves said, all right, well, I mean, he's like a foot taller, not actually, but he's a lot taller and a lot longer, and Trae Young's not a good defender in the first place, so we'll just throw this in to McDaniels and see what happens. And that was a big part of the Wolves scoring 40 in the first quarter and building that 11-point lead by the end of the first frame. Was the Hawks saying, we're going to guard you with Trae Young, guard Jaden McDaniels with Trae Young, and the Wolves saying, fine, we'll take that matchup. So just a really strong across-the-board starting lineup game. And, I think that Rudy and Kyle Anderson, their game stuck out the most to me. Of course, Conley had the best line, right? 21-6 with only 1 turnover, 9 of 13 shooting. And also just kind of hit a couple big shots early after the rough 3 of 13 shooting on Friday. That was good to see him bounce back in the way that he did. So good game from Conley too. Lastly, the bench. I thought the bench and the rotation from Chris Finch was pretty intriguing in this game. We saw Torian Prince get 22 minutes off the bench. McDaniels only had 26 minutes. Conley only played 28 minutes. Part of that was due to the margin, but not entirely. Josh Minott came into the game at the end of the first quarter as a defensive substitution, and the Wolves had Anthony Edwards guarding Trae Young on the final possession of the quarter. But they had Josh Minott and Jaden McDaniels both re-enter the game. Well, McDaniels re-enter, Minott enter. So you had all 3 of those guys on the floor and no point guard. They took Jordan McLaughlin off the floor because it's a defensive possession, and the Wolves just said, hey, Chris Finch said, hey, switch everything. And so sure enough, Ant gets screened. They switch. Minott forces Trae Young into a tough mid-range fall away that he misses. The Wolves actually tried to do the same thing at the end of the third quarter, tried to put Minott back in the game for the same scenario, but he didn't get to the table in time, and he didn't get back in until garbage time. But I talked about this with Marty on the postcast. I'm intrigued to see if this is something the Wolves try a bit more. Now, Austin Rivers did not play. Of course, Karl-Anthony Towns will be back eventually, hopefully. I shouldn't say of course, hopefully. So there's going to be a lot more options for Chris Finch, but Minott, I think, has shown the ability to be a lockdown defender. If you just want an all-length lineup out there, I don't think we can like call it the death lineup or anything crazy like that at this point, but an all length bounciness lineup like Jaden McDaniels, Josh Mina, Anthony Edwards, like it's not going to get much better than that. You add in, maybe Mike Conley's on the floor. You have Kyle Anderson at the 5 if you want to go small. You have Anderson at the 4, Gobert at the 5. Whatever you do, there's so much length on this team. We said this at the beginning of the year with D'Angelo Russell in the starting lineup. But now if you add Josh Minott to the mix as somebody who potentially, not rotation minutes, but gets situational minutes moving forward, that's a scary defensive lineup. There's a lot of upside to what this team, and the Hawks are a good defensive team. I know they scored 115, but the Wolves forced 15 turnovers. I think 10 or 11 were in the first half. Atlanta shot 4 of 22 from outside the arc, 18%. And to me, that's scheme by the Wolves, forcing them off the 3-point line, and just a good job contesting under control. And that is the calling card. I probably should open the show with this. That's the calling card of this Wolves team right now is defense. And it seems silly when they give up 115, and that's what I'm saying. But it seems less silly when you play at the pace the Wolves do and you score 136 and you force them to shoot 18% from 3. And nobody besides Trae Young scored more than 16 for the Atlanta Hawks in this game. So that's a recipe the Wolves are going to try and ride moving forward. And it gets tougher against Boston on Wednesday, even though the Celtics have struggled of late. We'll talk more about that later this week. But that'll be a good test for this Wolves defense that's playing so well here of late. All right, I want to close with individual studs and duds as we always do. We'll peek ahead, talk about what's on tap here for the Wolves this week. Today's episode of Locked On Wolves is brought to us by our friends at FanDuel. The midway point of the NBA season has come and gone, and now is the perfect time to download FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. New customers get a no-sweat first bet up to $1,000. That's bonus bets back if your first bet doesn't win. Just download the FanDuel Sportsbook app. It's safe, secure, and super easy to use. Then you can bet on everything from the money line to point scores and threes drained. Wolves Celtics, go check that line out. Prop bets, the whole thing for Wednesday. Plus, FanDuel even lets you combine your bets for a chance at a bigger payout with a same game parlay. Don't miss the chance to get your no sweat first bet up to $1,000 in bonus bets when you go to FanDuel.com/lockedon. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon to learn more. Make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, let's close this thing out by talking individual studs and duds. I talked a lot about the bench unit as a whole. Real quickly before I get to studs and duds, because I can't give him a stud. I got to shout out Luka Garza. No Naz Reid in this game. He sat out with calf soreness, something like that. I guess officially in the box score tightness. But Garza played really well in the first half. The Wolves needed those bench minutes. Gobert looked like he tweaked his ankle, that he was questionable to begin with. Game time decision after he rolled it on Friday. Gobert hobbled a bit in the first half. Needed to get a breather. Garza comes in, plays really well in that first stint. He also put up some numbers later in the game and into garbage time, but he did have 14 points on 6 of 7, 3 boards, 2 assists, and a steal. He also racked up 5 fouls in 18 minutes because it's Luka Garza, and that's what he does. But strong minutes. I mean, what they needed, it was that stint in the first half, whatever it was, 6-7 minutes. And he gave them that and more. I think he was better than expected, and that's what you need out of your fourth string center, I guess. And that's what they got from Garza. So good game from Luka. All right. Studs in this one, obviously Kyle Anderson, talked extensively about him before, but the triple-double, 14, 12, and 10, 5 of 6 shooting, 1 of 2 outside the arc, 3 of 3 at the line, 2 steals, 2 blocks, and a plus 33. Slow-mo was fantastic on both ends of the floor in this game. Also got to give one to Mike Conley, 21 and 6, plus a rebound and a steal, only 1 turnover, 9 of 13 shooting, hit a couple of nice floaters, at least one really tough kind of almost kind of a fadeaway 3. I think he came around a pin down, caught it, and was kind of drifting back into his left and knocked down a tough 3. It was 3 of 5 outside the arc. Missed the technical free throw after Trae Young picked up the late tech in this game, but a good game for Mike Conley. Again, 21 and 6. We'll take that every night of the week. And then Anthony Edwards has to be the third one in this game. Again, I talked a lot about how Rudy played well. Jaden McDaniels played really well early. But I mean, Ant, 32 on 12 of 25, just 2 of 10 outside the arc and 6 of 10 at the line. So you'd like to see him do a little better in both of those categories. But 8 rebounds, 5 assists, 2 blocks, and a steal. 3 turnovers in 36 minutes. You can deal with that because he played so well in so many other facets, and also just handles the ball a lot for this team. So that, I mean, compared to where he was a couple weeks ago, turnover wise, that's actually improved quite a bit. I didn't really have a problem with Ant and how he took care of the ball in this game. I thought he did pretty well. I guess a brief shout out for Taurean Prince. He played well against one of his former teams, 9 points off the bench for Taurean. And we talked about Garza, talked about McLaughlin, kind of a nondescript game from the other guys. But in general, a well-rounded win for Minnesota. They shot almost 59% from the field, 43% from three. They struggled a little at the free throw line. Again, it got better as the game went on, but that's something that we kind of need to keep an eye on. They've scuffled a bit there here recently, but they also won that turnover battle. Like I mentioned earlier, they only turned it over 10 times. The Hawks turned it over 15. The points in the paint, the Wolves had 82 points in the game. The only place the Wolves lost was rebounding, but that's just because the Hawks missed so many shots and had a million offensive rebounds, a lot of long rebounds on those missed threes. And Onyeka Okongwu had 9 offensive rebounds himself in this game, which is crazy. But anyway, strong win for Minnesota. A mediocre Hawks team, but still a relatively healthy Hawks team. They've been playing better of late. They've got a good coach. So a solid win to win by 21 on the road, this weird 1-game road trip, go back to Minnesota. Other games from Monday night across the association, not as many. Like the schedule's getting spread out now. Memphis beat Dallas, which is good for the Wolves. Utah lost to Miami, which is also good for the Wolves. As of me recording this following the game, Sacramento's in a 1-possession game early in the fourth quarter against the Bucks. And same with the Suns and Golden State. They're in the third quarter, and that's a 2-possession game. So not sure how those are going to shake out. By the time you're listening to this, you probably know, and the standings will be less relevant. So I won't spend a lot of time on that. But as of this recording, after the Jazz lost and the Mavs lost and the Wolves win, the Wolves are now by themselves in 7th place in the West, a full game ahead of Dallas, and technically 2 because they also have the tiebreaker, a half game behind the Golden State Warriors, who are currently playing. So if Golden State loses tonight against Phoenix, which is certainly feasible, Golden State and Minnesota will be tied for the 6th seed in the West. And either way, then will be a half game behind the Clippers for the 5 seed in the West. A full game behind the Clippers for the 5 seed in the West. Remember, the Wolves also have that tiebreaker against the Clippers too. So the 5 seed is far from out of reach. Like it's completely possible. And again, they'll be tied for the 6 seed if the Warriors end up losing tonight. But they're also now a game clear of the Mavs, technically 2 games, and a game and a half clear of the Lakers, Pelicans, and Thunder. And the Jazz, by the way, fell all the way back to 12th. They were in like 9th, and now they fell to 12th with the loss. So good night in the Western Conference for Minnesota. And upcoming, the Wolves have the Celtics Wednesday. We'll preview that on tomorrow's show and talk extensively about that matchup, the upcoming schedule. This is going to be a fun stretch run here down the stretch the rest of the season. We'll, of course, we'll be back, like I said, previewing Wolves Celtics Wednesday. We'll do the postcast Wednesday night following Wolves Celtics as well. So lots upcoming this week. A packed schedule. They're back on the game day off thing that we're used to. No more of this 2 days off in a row business. So lots of action yet this week. A big thank you to those that do make Locked On Wolves your first listen every day. Of course, this show is free and available everywhere, including YouTube, as well as all of your favorite audio platforms. You can also watch on the Locked On Sports Minnesota app on both Roku and Amazon Fire TV. You can also follow on Twitter at Locked On T-Wolves and at Beecken with 2 B's, 2 E's, CKEN. Of course, the Locked On Wolves podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Remember, the Locked On Network is your local experts on all the biggest stories. Now make your second listen to Game to Game NBA podcast. From every moment, every top performance, and every result, Locked On Game to Game covers every game from across the NBA with local analysis that only Locked On can deliver. Follow Game to Game on Locked On NBA, available on the Odyssey app, YouTube, and wherever you get your podcasts. Once again, I'm Ben Beecken. This is the Locked On Wolves podcast, and we'll catch you next time.